Can everyone hear me? Can everybody hear me? Preeti, Donna,
Yes, sir.
right. So, Donna, are you fairly aware of what we've covered so far, or do you need a small revision of the same? We could do that.
So, to be honest, I'm not clear with the previous lectures.
All right, all right. So I think we'll do a thing that we'll quickly skim through what we've done so far, and then I'll first see whatever doubts you have. We'll clarify them, and then we'll move on to the new topic. Sounds good?
Yes, sir, sure.
Great. Okay. So in the first lecture, we started talking about the Constitution. Uh, what all have you gathered so far that from what we've done? Am I audible, Donna?
Yes, sir, audible.
Yeah. Uh, I was asking what all have you gathered so far? What all have you understood so far? Whatever it is, even if it is a little bit, that's fine.
So, like in Constitution, we notice types of it, like justice, rules, and rights, safeguards.
Correct, correct. So, if we were to think of it in this way, that the Constitution is what? So, just the way we did it in the first lecture, let's try and note down certain points regarding the Constitution. So, let's say, all right, one second. Just give me a second. I am trying to work this. Okay. I was facing some issue and I'm still facing an issue with this pen. Anyway, I think it's better that I write down these points instead of this. This mouse pad is a mess. Okay. So when we say constitution, the things that come to our mind, okay, let me just analyze this. The things that come to our mind is number one, rules. Then you have safeguards. Now, why? What do you think is the function of safeguards when we say safeguards? Who can tell me? Donna, can you tell me how safeguards work essentially? I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, sir, but not exactly.
Okay. Is it better now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. I
Yeah.
can.
So, can you tell me how safeguards work? How safeguards actually function in a constitutional setup?
So, no idea.
Um, could you define safeguards?
So, to protect
Okay, so safeguards essentially aim at protection, correct?
Yeah,
It could also mean preservation of something,
yeah, like in discriminations and reservations.
correct? So it could mean protection against discrimination, it could mean preservation of something that is either endangered or is scarce in availability, right?
Yeah, right.
Safeguards can also mean something that acts as an enabling tool.
Yeah, right.
So safeguards work in these three major ways. Now, what are rules? Our basic understanding of rules is that when we say rules, the first thing that comes to our mind is that if we break rules, we shall be punished for them, right?
Yes.
So our centric version of rules is such where punishment comes first before what is supposed to be followed. So rules are essentially aimed at creating uh, a setup for daily lives, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So when rules are a setup for daily lives, what they essentially do is that uh, they create order. Okay,
Yeah.
and while creating order, we could also think of it in this way that they protect us from chaos.
Yes, sir. Getting.
Now, when we say protection from chaos, chaos can be in multiple ways. For example, when we started discussing constitution, one of the most important ideas that we were discussing with respect to constitution was such where how has the constitution emerged, okay, or how has the idea of a constitutional setup come into being. So when we say origin of the constitution, okay, and not just Indian constitution, the whole idea, the premise of constitution, uh, the first one was the divine rights theory. Remember that?
So this divine rights I haven't heard.
Okay. Uh, Donna, could you tell me which year are you studying in?
So second year,
Second
BSc
year.
IT.
BSc. All right. So these are topics which people who come from social sciences are fairly familiar with, but not a problem. We'll still have a look at that. Now, divine rights theory emerges from from a specific time period in Europe. So it comes from medieval or let's say pre-medieval Europe. Okay, and in that point in time, uh, the church had complete hold over everything. So the
Yes, sir.
church controlled. We've learned this in school history, right? That the church controlled all the decisions of the state,
Yeah.
and it was also this one thing that the clergymen, okay, or the clergymen
Yes.
were also the landowners, and land has always been a source of power. Now, what happens in divine rights theory is that the king, okay, understand this, the king is understood to be the hand of God, okay.
Yes.
And when we say hand of God, what does that mean? It means that the king has been given his position as a king simply because he has been selected by God to become the king, okay.
Yes. Getting.
The ancient version of monarchy is such. See, understand that human society as a whole has undergone multiple changes over the period of last 12,000 years, including 2,000 years in the Christian era and 10,000 years before Christ. Okay, as for as long as we've had civilization in place, we've had this consistent change in the way we understand society, in the way we understand governance, and one of the longest running uh, ways in how state has functioned is the divine rights theory, where the king is understood to be sent by God Himself to look after the subjects on earth. Okay,
Yes, sir.
so when the king is understood to be the hand of God, and understand this that this is the church, especially in Europe. So, what is the Word of God? The Bible is the Word of God, right?
Yes, right.
And the Word of God becomes the Constitution. All right. This is one very important thing that we need to understand, that when the Bible is the Word of God and that is the Constitution, everything that is uh, brought about in the society is brought along only through the biblical lines. Okay. So whether it is the Ten Commandments which the Christians follow, or whether it is anything else, it is surrounded with the ideas that the Bible promotes. Okay. Now this is again, like I said, this theory is very Eurocentric. We need to understand that this theory has originated in Europe. So our way of looking at the theory is essentially very Eurocentric. We still haven't discussed how things were in the South Asian area, or we haven't discussed how it was in West Asia, or in Latin America, or in Africa. Okay, but this is the main theory which dictates our understanding of how constitution functions. Okay. Now,
Yes.
now social contract theory. Social contract theory is another interesting theory where you will find out that there are three major thinkers, okay, or three major ways of looking at it, of which we will be looking at only two, but we'll mention those three thinkers, okay. One is, one second, Thomas Hobbes, okay. Thomas Hobbes was from the 14th, no, wait, yeah, the 14th century, okay. Then
Yes.
you have John Locke, who was from the 17th century.
So the second one here.
John Locke.
Okay.
Are you able to see the screen? I'm typing this down as we speak.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Not.
So you have John Locke from the 17th century, and then you have a thinker from the French Revolution called Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Okay, he's from the 18th century, or for a simpler understanding, he belongs to the French Revolution. Okay, could you tell me when the French Revolution took place? Can you tell me the date?
So in 1789.
Correct, 1789, which means it's in the latter half of the 18th century, correct?
Yes, right.
Great. Now, when we talk about the first two, okay, let's forget the third one for now, because his theory of social contract is a slightly more complicated one with the general will and the specific will. But in looking at the first theory, okay, I'll put it in capital A here, okay. Thomas Hobbes believed that human society is a place which is full of chaos, okay, and human society exists in absolute liberty. Now, what is absolute liberty? Absolute liberty is the place where anybody has the right to do anything that they think is correct. Okay? Now, absolute liberty is a state where, to define it simply, you can kill someone just because you think it's right. Alright?
Yes, right.
Now, when you say that you can kill someone just because you think it's right, not everybody is willing to kill somebody, correct? At the same time, we also need to understand that not everybody wants to be killed, which means, let's say, for example, let's say I wish to kill you, okay, but then it is against your right to life, isn't it? When you are living in a state of liberty, that also gives you the absolute right to life. Your life cannot be just taken away. So, my right of freedom is coming into contradiction with your right to freedom. Are you understanding this?
Yes, you're getting it.
Yeah. So when this happens, we need someone who mediates, we need someone who regulates this, okay? Because in a state of absolute liberty, the first thing that is endangered is life, okay? The right to life and the right to liberty, because somebody else's liberty might mean that my liberty gets harmed. So, in some or the other way, we need to have a safeguard that ensures this does not happen. So, we come up with one setup, okay, which is one kind of a social contract. Okay, now understand, why is it called a contract? What is a contract? A contract is an agreement between two parties. Okay, a contract essentially happens where there is some provision of services or where there is something that is being offered in return of something, right? That is a contract. This is the basic understanding of
Yes.
a contract. So when you say it's a social contract, the social contract is signed between the people and one person, which Thomas Hobbes terms as Leviathan. Okay. Now again, understand that the word Leviathan is another biblical reference. Okay, the Leviathan is considered to be a gigantic, huge, strong creature which is virtually indestructible. Okay. Now the Leviathan is the one who shall be controlling the society. Okay, or who shall be uh, given the authority to control the society. But when we say given the authority, you need to understand that this person is given this authority simply because he has that much power or has the will and the wit to control the society and regulate people. When we give him the authority, we are not simply giving him the authority, okay? We are giving him the authority by surrendering certain rights, okay? And when we surrender certain rights, we are handing him the power, okay, of legitimate violence, okay?
Yes.
Now what is legitimate violence? Can you tell me?
So it's a violence which is acted on
It is a violent act, agreed, but why, what gives it a legitimacy, what makes it legitimate?
by giving the power to someone else, they react and
Let's say when we talk about legitimate violence, understand this, okay? uh, have you ever seen a lathi charge in person or on news?
yes, sir. See.
Right? When police are given the orders for lathi charging people, or when they use water cannons or tear gas, right? When they try to come up with crowd control mechanisms, most of these mechanisms are violent. Agreed.
Yes, sir. Agreed.
But can you lodge a case against the policemen because they were violent in a lathi charge?
Sorry, sir.
Can you lodge a case or can you file a complaint against the policemen because they were violent in a lathi charge?
No, sir. We can't
Why?
because they got the rights to.
Exactly. So something that has given them the legitimate right to act with violence. Okay, that is the government. Okay. So the government has the legitimate authority for committing violence against the people, isn't it? Tomorrow, if there is a search and comb operation that has been launched by paramilitary or black hat commandos, okay, they have the right to simply come into our homes and search for anything they want. They have the right to detain anybody under suspicion of something, or they have the right to press charges, or if we try to run, they have the right to shoot us below the waist, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
These are violent acts, but they've been given this authority. Why? The reason they've been given this authority is because they uh, they are the hand of the government that is given this power to control the chaos that can possibly take place in the society. Okay,
Yes, sir.
I hope
Getting.
everything is clear so far.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Clear.
Now, you might not find this in your book that is prescribed for Indian polity and constitution. Okay. And the reason you might not find this is because the book simply does not talk about these things. It directly jumps to the idea of constitution in India. The reason I am explaining all of this and the reason I did this in the first class also is because we cannot move on to understanding the first couple of modules in the book or in the paper unless and until we are clear with these ideas. The constitution is not simply a mechanism of governing people. The constitution is not simply a mechanism that tells you what your rights are and what your duties are and on what principles you work. It also comes with a huge understanding and a huge theoretical uh, baggage of sorts where you need to know what led to the creation of the constitution. The way we have a topic on the basic structure and the philosophy of the constitution, uh, it is something that is necessary for all of us to understand. It is something that needs to be discussed in depth, because unless and until we do that, we will constantly be questioning ourselves as to why a particular right was introduced or why a specific provision was introduced in the constitution at a specific point in time. Okay, because everything else,
Yes, sir.
speaking strictly from the terms of the paper, everything else can be simply committed to memory. Okay, everything else can be done simply on the basis of how well you can memorize stuff, how well you can remember dates and articles and whatnot, isn't it? But
Yes,
more
sir.
importantly, we need to look at it from a perspective where we also understand the core essence of it. I know that people see, and we've had this discussion in class last time. Unfortunately, because of the microphone issue, or probably because I keep moving while I teach on the board, uh, the issue was such that you know we were talking about how bureaucrats are supposed to be, and since you people are aspirants, I understand that there is a sense of national duty that you people possess, which inspires you to go for this. Okay, when you want to become part of the executive wing, it's not simply because of the stature and the provisions and the facilities it comes with. It also has to do with what you want to do towards your society and the country. And in order to do that, it's important that we understand the constitution first, because the constitution is the governing mechanism of everything that we do, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I hope यहाँ तक clear है, थॉमस हॉब्स वाले part तक clear है. Okay.
Yes, sir. Clear.
Now this
Yeah,
understand.
one thing.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Like Leviathan, is it having any another meaning or the hidden meaning in it?
The word Leviathan.
Yes.
The word Leviathan essentially is used as the meaning for ruler or someone who is all powerful, almighty. Okay, someone who is omnipotent. So when we use the word Leviathan, it is used in the context where a person who can also act as a guardian, but as and when time requires, that person can also be the punisher. Okay, so
Yeah, get it.
if I will give you a reference from Norse mythology, okay, and it is also used in popular culture in Marvel movies. If you've seen the movie Thor, there is a scene where Loki sends a destroyer. Now, this idea of the destroyer is something that has existed in Norse mythology, which is the Nordic equivalent of Leviathan. That someone who is virtually
Okay.
indestructible and someone who works as either a guardian or a punisher, as and when required. Okay.
Yes, sir, get it.
Yeah, so that's how it functions. Uh, Antika, are you there? I believe not. Anyway, so far we've covered this part. Okay. Uh, if you want to take a screen grab of whatever I've written, you can do so, because I think I might have to erase some of it because of shortage of space on the screen.
Done with it, sir.
Great, great. So is it okay if I take it off?
Yes, sir, sure.
Wonderful. So I'm just keeping this just the way it is. Okay, I'm keeping it in one part. And let's see if I can extend this. All right. So we're done with this much. Now let's move on to John Locke so that we can arrive at our modern understanding of how a constitution works. Okay. Now John Locke was one of those people who believed in a slightly more optimistic side of human beings. Okay. According to John Locke, human beings are such that they are. So his perception of humans was that humans are intelligent, they are responsible, okay,
Yes.
and more importantly, they communicate, okay, and cooperate. Now, when you have communicating, cooperating, intelligent, responsible human beings, it sounds like a perfect combination almost, doesn't it? That nothing can go wrong after this point. Okay, that humans, if they are intelligent, they are responsible, they know how things work, they know what their responsibility is, and they can communicate with each other with respect to their needs, and they can cooperate in order for those needs to come together. Nothing should be a problem. But there is always the element of human ambition. Okay, when we talk about
Yes.
human ambition is something that overtakes a lot of other things. Okay, human ambition eventually leads to greed, and greed leads to breaking laws, or at least bending them. So when you start breaking or bending laws, what does it lead to? When you start breaking or bending laws, it leads to disruption in the society, right? For
Yes,
example,
sir.
if a person is greedy, okay, and let's say greed in its most technical biblical sense, okay, let's take greed for money. Now, if a person is greedy, or if a person is, we can also think of it in this way, that a person is absolutely helpless because of his circumstances, and he cannot find a job. Now, these are two cases, okay. One case is where a person is well off, everything is fine, and he can easily sustain with the amount of money that he has, or the amount of resources that he or she has, right? Then there is other, where a person is absolutely helpless and cannot find a job, needs something to sustain. One is greedy, one is helpless. Both of them commit a common crime, that they decide to rob somebody, okay, or they decide to steal something from somewhere. When this happens, stealing is essentially taking away that belongs to somebody else, right? That is the clinical definition of it. When we say that you are stealing, it also creates a disruption in that person's life, because let's say if a person is asleep and you rob them in their sleep, and you go and steal whatever is there, whatever they have in their vault, okay, they could be their life savings. You don't know if tomorrow that person had planned for buying a new house, or going for an important surgery, or doing something for his or her parents or partner. You don't know. They might, or they might even want to do something for their child, or maybe they decided that they will invest this money somewhere so that it will give enough return so that they can have a good education for their child. You don't know. What you were thinking of is what you wanted in that moment. So essentially, you create disruption in the society, and this disruption in the society leads to chaos. Okay, because then a person starts interpreting it in this way, that if one person is allowed to do it, then I should also be allowed to do it. The chaos turns into a chain reaction of sorts, leading to dissolution of the society. All right, now how do we
Yes.
avoid this? How do we avoid this? Can you take a guess? Just take a guess. What could it be? How do you avoid this kind of chaos in society? You create an agency. Now, this agency is based on the economic doctrine of laissez faire. Do you know what laissez faire means?
Not exactly, sir.
Or have you heard this term before?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Now, laissez-faire in its most technical sense translates to go away. Okay. Now, you can't tell the government or this external agency to completely go away, correct? But
Yep.
this agency and the creation of this agency was based into very important things. Okay. Uh, it is the fundamental basis. Okay. Let me just put it in a new point. Okay. The fundamental basis for this idea, okay, is the right to revolt. Okay. Now, what is the right to revolt? When you are entrusting a specific agency to do something for the society, and if that agency, which is the government, okay, it fails, or it is not living up to the expectations, or it turns tyrannical and starts dictating, then you need to do something about it, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So when you talk about tyranny, when you talk about oppression, it is important that the people have some power in their hand. Okay. So when the people have been given the right to revolt, what they can essentially do that is that uh, in the event that a government is inadequate, okay, they have the right to overthrow it. So when you overthrow it, you will basically replace it with a new one. Okay. So this is the fundamental basis of it. Now, why do you have the doctrine of, coming back to the earlier point, why do you have the doctrine of laissez-faire in this whole scenario? It's because when you talk about the doctrine of laissez-faire, it is meant to imply this, that the government, okay, will have limited control. Arey yaar, I hate this. The government shall have limited control. The government is only an agency that is regulated, that is meant for regulation. I beg your pardon. Government is only an agency that is meant for the regulation of society, the regulation of everything that we do. Okay, but the right or the power for this regulation is given to them by the people. Okay, for this, John Locke talks about a very simple model. Okay, a model that includes three major elements. These elements are the benevolence, okay, the trustees, and the beneficiaries. Okay. Now, can you tell me the difference between these?
One is showing the kindness to the people, and the second, the trustworthy.
Um, can you tell me what a beneficiary is? Let's start there. What a beneficiary means.
Uh, the advantage to be taken.
Beneficiary is someone who is supposed to receive something, right? Someone who is supposed to receive. Uh, Beneficiary is a term that is generally used a lot in the banking sector, right? That someone who is supposed to receive a
Yes.
dividend, or someone who is supposed to receive an interest of something is called a beneficiary. When we say beneficiary here, it means again the people who are going to receive their rights, people who are going to receive their protection. Okay, and again, even here in this social contract, the people are going to surrender certain rights, but that does not take away certain rights from them. Okay, creating an agency with the laissez-faire principle. So I'm adding this point here up here. Okay, surrendering
Yes.
limited rights except the right to life, liberty, and property. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, when we talk about this and these three elements of benevolence, trustees, and beneficiaries, benevolent is someone who gives, someone who bestows something, someone who provides or offers something. That person is called to be the benevolent. Okay, the trustees are the ones which have been supporting. So you understand, in a college or in a school or in any organization, when we say that this person is a trustee of an organization, it essentially means that the person is providing some sort of funding, isn't it? That is the time when we actually use the word trustee, right?
Yes, sir.
So when we say trustee, in here also we mean that the person who is supporting or the person who is ensuring the survival of the benevolence in order to regulate. Now, who are the people who are the trustees and who are the people who are the beneficiaries in this equation? So we must understand that in these three elements, okay, let me bifurcate it here. Okay, the benevolence or the benevolent is the government, okay, and the trustees and beneficiaries are both the people themselves, okay. Because they are the ones who are going to receive the benefits from having a government, correct? And at the same time, they are also the ones who are going to make sure that the government stands, because they are the ones who make sure that the government exists, right?
Yes, sir. Right.
And hence, the fundamental basis, like I mentioned before, it continues that the fundamental basis of this idea is in the right to revolt. That in the event that a government is inadequate, they have the right to overthrow it. All right. This marks the beginning. Okay. Understand this, that this is the event that marks the beginning of our modern understanding of democracy. Okay, the way we perceive democracy, the way we understand how democracy functions, all of that begins with this. Okay, where people have been given the right to choose, people have been given the right to make sure that the regulation by a specific agency that you have created is going on perfectly, and it also depends upon the people, if the government or the agency does not function properly, you overthrow it. This marks the beginning of our modern idea of democracy. All right, and democracy is one of the most
Yes.
important principles that our constitution upholds. So take a screen grab of this so that we can begin with the next thing.
Done, sir.
Wonderful. Okay, that was not supposed to happen. Now, when we talk about the constitution and how the Indian constitution works, okay, we first need to look at uh, what does the Indian constitution have and what are the features of the Indian constitution, okay. But before we move on to the features of the Indian constitution, uh, I think we should first look at the philosophy of the constitution. Is that
Yes, sir.
okay? Would that be fine?
Yes, sir.
All right. So last time when we were discussing the philosophy of the constitution, what all could you gather from the class that we had?
So the basic structure,
The basic structure of the constitution. So, what is the basic structure of the constitution?
like there's no amendments, equality, freedom.
Okay, okay. Let us again have a look at how the basic structure and everything else comes along, and how the philosophy of the constitution works. And this is going to involve a lot of history. So I suggest that you pay a little closer attention. Okay. Now, the first legitimate attack of the British happens in India at this date, right?
Yes, sir.
The Battle of Plassey against the Nawab of Bengal. Now, from this point forth, it takes them close to 100 years to come up to the point of the national uprising. Okay,
Yes, sir. Get.
but then again, this is still very recent. The problems that India as a country has faced uh, come from a really longer period of time. They come from such a point in time where let's try and look at the earlier era. Okay, uh, when we talk about the Indian Constitution and the principles that it upholds, okay, we will first have a look at how the preamble to the Constitution works. Okay, let me
Yes, sir.
1 second. Let me just. Let's hope if I can write in this one. I hope this is visible.
Yes, sir. Visit.
All right. Okay. Now, when we say Indian Constitution, it has a number of things that it includes, right? The Indian Constitution will include the following features. Do you know the preamble to the Constitution?
Sir, not the entire part, but
The first two lines are the most important ones, honestly. Okay, as long as you remember those, it's going to be fine. So, the first line of the preamble to the Constitution goes, "We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic," right?
yes, sir.
Which shall also be based on equality, liberty, fraternity, and what's the last one? Justice.
Integrity.
Justice, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, when we talk about these 10 points are extremely important. And why are they important? Because they come with a specific idea. Okay, the idea where you understand that these 10 points are the markers of everything that the constitutional philosophy talks about. Okay, the constitutional philosophy includes a number of things on the lines of what these 10 are. Now, why do we have something called sovereignty? What is the meaning of sovereignty? Can you tell me?
The part and authority,
Authority of whom?
like a state government,
Of the state, but the authority
government.
of the government. Okay, but then that is just simply authority. Why do we call it sovereign? What is sovereignty?
So the sovereignty is of the parliament, right?
So sovereignty technically translates to a very simple idea, that is self-rule. And in a more nuanced understanding, it is the absence of external control or influence.
So this is self-governing is right.
Sorry?
Self-governing is also right for the sovereignty, right?
So self-governing. Basically, so if we were to translate it in Hindi, sovereignty translates to sarvabhaumikta. Okay. So if you read the Hindi version
Okay.
of the preamble, it will have the word sarvabhaum. Okay. And when you say sarvabhaum, it technically means which is devoid of external control, जहाँ पे बाहर की कोई authority तुम्हें control नहीं करती. Okay. It is the rule of self, swaraj, है ना? That is the that is the essential demand that Indians always had during our struggle of independence. That we want Purna Swaraj,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
So that is the reason we have come up with the idea of sovereign. Now, why do we have sovereign? Let's come back here. Okay, I hope you can see this on the screen. Okay.
Yes, sir. Able.
Now, India has India as a subcontinent, India as a country. Okay, let's be honest. Okay, India as a country never existed. Okay, it never existed as one single geographical country. It was divided. Okay,
Yes, sir.
into multiple kingdoms and smaller princely states. Now, when you have princely states and multiple kingdoms, you don't have a single consolidated way of life, isn't it? What these
Yes.
princely states lead to is number one, a sentiment of regionalism. Okay, when we say regionalism, what do you mean by that? It is basically uh, having loyalty and emotional attachment towards your own region. Okay, so if you go through news, or if you have some idea of how things have been in Mumbai and Maharashtra, you will realize that there is a huge regional sentiment that dictates the people here. Okay, it is a highly anti north sentiment that a lot of native people from Mumbai harbor. Okay, they have a very strong regional sentiment towards Mumbai and Maharashtra and Marathi. है ना?
Yes, sir.
This is a sentiment of regionalism that has existed because of the history of Maharashtra. Similarly, you will find such sentiments in Rajasthan, or you will find them in any other place. You find this sentiment extremely strong in the south, where they always give preference to what is regional. Okay, they speak in their language. The banners and everything is in their language. Uh, they barely speak in Hindi. Okay, and Hindi is obviously not the national language, so there is no compulsion for them to speak in Hindi. Okay, but that's the whole point, that you have strong loyalty and attachment towards your own region. Okay, what else happens? Okay, there is no uniform governance. When you are divided into smaller kingdoms, there is no uniform authority or law. Everything belongs to a specific kingdom's rule as to how that kingdom is and how it shall function. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, this was the situation that has existed from a really long time. Now, what is the second important feature here? Okay, wait, let me mark this as the Roman numeral 1. Okay. Now, the second important thing that India faced from a really long time is the problem of communalism. Okay. The problem of communalism started after the Persian conquest. Okay. So in the 12th century, right? When people from the Middle East started coming here, what did happen? What happened after these people started coming to India?
So, like which people?
Sorry, can you hear me?
So, like whom you're talking of? Like
So,
whom came to India?
so who were the ones to come to India first? Who were the non-native Indians who came from the Middle East to India? You essentially had people who followed Islam, correct? So when we
Yes.
talk about the Persian conquest, whether it was Muhammad Ghori or whether it was Tughlaq or whether it was Ibrahim Lodi or anybody else, right? You need to know that these were the people who followed Islam, and that was the clinical identity that they had. Okay, that was the way that they were interpreted every single time. It was not about where they came from, it was not about what were they, it was more about the identity marker that was very obvious about them. See, every human being carries a certain social identity, right? We all have a social location, we all have a specific identity, and if you've seen the movie PK, it gives you a good example of how we've come up with our own markers of how an identity is. Okay, so if you have a mustache and a beard, you could be either a Hindu or a Muslim or a Jewish person. You take away the beard, uh, it's still confusing, but you take away the mustache and keep the beard, you're definitely a Muslim. You put on a headgear or a turban, then you are probably a Sikh, or if you put on a hat instead, then you are a Jewish person. So it's all variant, it's all very subjective, but it's more important for us to understand here in this aspect that when these people came here, okay, Islam was something that was not known to India on the large scale. Islam was something that probably existed in smaller pockets, or probably along the Punjab Sindh border, but it was never something that was practiced or introduced to the Indian masses on a large scale. Okay, and when we talk about the idea of whether it was introduced on a large scale or not, it is important for us to know that the whole Sufi movement that happened in the 11th century and in the latter and in the first half of the 12th century was what gave a lot of momentum to Islam as a religion or Islam as a religious practice in that part of the country, in that part of the world. Later on, when these people came to India, the major conflict that it led to was the conflict of religion. Okay, so this conflict was based in two things. Okay, the first was
Okay.
the struggle for power, because these people understand that this was the time which were the medieval ages. Okay, and in the medieval ages, we have a very colored perception of how Indian kings were, or how Hindu kings were, and how Islamic kings were. But we need to understand that in the medieval ages, everybody was cruel, everybody was fighting, everybody was willing to have power. There was nobody who was a good guy. दूध का धुला बोलते हैं ना, वैसा कोई नहीं था. Everybody wanted power, everybody wanted to rule. There was nobody who was like, अरे नहीं लोग मरेंगे, बेकसूरों की जान जाएगी, नहीं. उनको फर्क नहीं पड़ता था. उनका फोकस क्लियर था. They wanted power, they wanted to rule. And when you want power, when you want to rule, uh, like they say everything is fair in love and war, वैसा वाला हिसाब हो जाता है फिर. Then anything you do is okay. So when we talk about people like, let's say, Samrat Ashok, okay, Samrat Ashok was one of the first people who went up to the limits of Kabul and Kandahar, and this was long before any other king even thought of doing this. Okay, the Magadh Empire was a gigantic, huge empire that existed for a really, really long time, and I am sure you must be learning about this in history, है ना, कि इतना
Yes, sir.
बड़ा मगध एम्पायर था, तो वो प्यार मोहब्बत से तो नहीं हुआ है, राइट? When you talk about having such a gigantic empire, it has definitely not come about by simply, you know, by simply cooperating with people and telling them that, give me your kingdom and I will give you protection. It doesn't work that way. It essentially works in a way where you have to fight, you have to wage wars, you have to spill blood. उसके अलावा नहीं होता. So when we talk about these whole issues of religion and violence and whatnot, it is unfair to think that only the Mughals or only the people who came before the Mughals, whether it was any other dynasty, it is unfair to think that they were the ones who were the only cruel kings that have existed throughout history. No, you've had much more cruelty, you've had so much more bloodshed before that and after that. Now, coming back to our understanding and our whole perception around these things and why these issues are so important in India and what they have to do with the constitution. Now, when we talk about this communal issue, this conflict between religion and culture slowly started to come down. Okay, understand that the beginning was very tumultuous. The struggle for power also led to one very important thing, that is cultural assimilation. Okay, now can you tell me the difference between? I'll give you two terms. Okay, see if you can tell me the difference. One is cultural assimilation, one is cultural distortion. Can you tell me what the difference is?
So assimilation and the another one is.
The other one is cultural distortion. Can you guess the difference between these two? Give it a try. Give it a shot.
So assimilation
Mm-hmm.
is a majority way, like they are changing the culture.
Is it?
Like it's a two-way.
All right. This is slightly unrelated, but is would you be comfortable in switching on your camera?
Sorry, sir.
Would you be comfortable in switching on your camera? Because
So
I.
actually, I'm not a good code.
All right. Not a problem. Not a problem. Fair.
By tomorrow, I'll try.
Sorry.
From next lecture, I'll try to.
I mean, simply see, it has nothing to do uh, with you. It simply is that I prefer getting to see my students at least once because everybody else is in the class. Acha, I also wanted to ask you this, that you've opted for an online class. Where do you stay?
So me from Vasai.
Oh, you're from Vasai. All right. So that is the reason you cannot make the commute to Andheri.
So actually, my college schedule is also there from morning till 12:30. They take it up till 1 o'clock, so I can't travel and.
Mm-hmm. I get it. I get it. Not a problem. Even I used to stay far off. I've been raised for a really long time in Nalasopara, so I know how traveling can be.
So the actual problem is I'm there with my third year, no, so I have to concentrate on that too. So
Correct. Correct. Fair enough. Not a problem. I was just curious to know because I wasn't sure as to what is the issue that is stopping you from coming offline. But okay, it's not a problem. Now, as I was saying, cultural assimilation and cultural distortion are two different terms. Cultural assimilation means basically the mixing of cultures. Okay, when you have two cultures mixing together, or when you have one larger culture slowly absorbing the other one, okay, or when you have two cultures absorbing bits and pieces of each other, that is how cultural assimilation works. What is cultural distortion? Cultural distortion is where your identity and the culture that you follow are completely different from each other. Okay, for example, take this as an instance. Uh, we know we talk about tribals in a specific fashion, right? And we have a theoretical understanding of how tribals are. That tribals are people who do not follow any specific religion. Tribals are the ones who worship the forces of nature and whatnot, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, this is the fact, and this is how their identity works. But I remember this distinctly when I was doing my master's. I had to go for a field visit, and that is when I noticed this. And this is something that is happening in India on a really wide scale. People who are tribals by identity, people who are living in tribal areas, are coming up with practices or are following practices that belong to Hinduism. Now, it's not that I have a personal issue with Hinduism, but then this is cultural distortion that is happening because of a specific majoritarian ethos that Hinduism has, isn't it? That since Hinduism is the majority religion in India, the practices of that religion get followed just as easily, and that is how it works. And now a lot of people, especially the youngest generations of tribals, they have forgotten their traditional deities, they have forgotten their traditional practices. What they know are the gods or deities that belong to a specific religion, and the practices and rituals that come in association with that. All right.
Yes, sir.
And this is what we call cultural distortion, where your identity is one, but the practices that you follow are completely different from that identity, which eventually leads to blurring of lines between what you are and what you do. Okay. In a multicultural setup like India, our identity is something that is extremely important. In a multicultural setup like India, uh, we have so many identities and so many practices and whatnot. Maintaining the individuality of it is very difficult. Maintaining the individuality of what we are and what we do, and what is it that we've received as heritage from our ancestors, is again very dicey. So I suggest that you know we look at things from a very logical and objective perspective when we talk about identities. We we often obviously have our personal biases, we have our preferences and prejudices, but we have to make sure that we keep all of those away when we talk about identities and when we talk about people, because as people who aspire to be part of bureaucracy, people who aspire to be part of the fold of the government that ensures everything stays in the right shape, it is important for us to appreciate these differences first. If we try to color everyone in the same color, it is going to create even more chaos than it already exists. All right,
Yes, sir.
great. Now, coming back to our point, when we talk about cultural assimilation, uh, there came about a period in, let's say, 16th century, okay, where
Okay.
you finally had some form of communal harmony. Okay, 16th century can be termed as the century for communal harmony, because no matter how much you want to fight or no matter how much differences you have, you will eventually stop fighting. Nobody wants to keep fighting, nobody wants to have bloodshed, right? So there came about a period of communal harmony. But the feeling of us versus them was always consistent. Okay, it was there in smaller amounts, it was there in larger doses, but it always existed. The idea of us versus them is where, we always considered these people as outsiders. And the moment you consider somebody, excuse me, the moment you consider somebody as an outsider, it is where you start harboring feelings of distancing and hatred after a point in time. When you cannot relate to the person, when you feel that a person is, you know that a person is somebody who does not belong to you or is encroaching on what is rightfully yours, you will obviously start feeling anger and hatred towards that person or towards the community from which the person belongs. However, this
Yes.
was not loud, this was not vocal. This became vocal in the year 1905. Okay, what happened in the year 1905? Partition of Bengal. There was a lot of bloodshed and there was partition of Bengal. Remember the whole beginning of the Khilafat movement?
Yeah.
Okay, and the Khilafat movement is often, even in today's times, misinterpreted as a movement that was against Hindus. No, just because it uses the word Khilaf doesn't really mean that it was against Hindus. No, the movement, Khilafat movement, was essentially a movement that was against this division and this brutality that was introduced by the British. Okay, the British divided uh, the whole thing. Okay, the British divided Bengal on the basis of religion. And when you divide something on religious grounds, what is going to lead into is a lot of bloodshed and a lot of violence and a lot of discontentment. The British, with this, okay, reignited the communal feelings in India. What later contributed to it is the two nation theory. Do you know what the two nation theory is?
Sorry, sir.
Do you know what the two nation theory is? I just typed it down. Just have a look at it. Two nation theory. Any idea what two nation theory is?
So the fought between the Hindus and Muslims.
Sort of, not entirely. You're on the right track. You're just missing out on one important detail. All right, I'll give you an idea of what the two nation theory is. Two nation theory was something that was propagated by two very important people. One is Barrister Muhammad Ali Jinnah, okay, and the other one, okay. Now understand that these two weren't working together, okay. They were doing it separately in their own ways, okay. You had Barrister Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and then you had I'm sure you must have heard both of these names in history, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now, when you talk of these two people, both of them in their own right were of a specific opinion. Now, what was this opinion? They were of the opinion that in this one geographical place, okay, two different or two distinct nations exist. Now, even if they exist, the problem is that they cannot coexist. And hence, separation from each other is essential. All right. यहाँ तक clear
Yes,
है
sir.
पूरा? Now, when you say two nations exist together, कैसा है? When we use the word nation, we use it very fleetingly and sweepingly every single time. But nation as an idea means a number of things. Okay. Firstly, nation is a psychological thing. Country is a geographical thing. Okay. When you have an actual landmass in front of you, that is when you can talk about the idea of country. But when you say nation, nation is something that resides in the heart. Okay, nation is a psychosomatic or an abstract entity that does not uh, that is not necessarily a part of geographical terms, or that is not necessarily a part of the physical world. Nation is something that I carry inside my heart. Nation is something that I have within my own self. So मैं जहाँ भी जाता हूँ मेरा देश मेरे साथ चलता है, right?
Yes, sir.
लेकिन does that mean that I am carrying land with me? No. It means that the sentiment of belonging is what I carry inside of my heart. Okay, that is what they mean when they say nation. Okay, is that understood? Is that clear?
Yes, sir. Understood.
Great. Uh, I'm sorry I'm interrupting you. Could you tell me what the time is?
So 3:27.
3:27. All right. Okay. Do you need a break for 5 minutes?
Yes, sir. It's okay.
All right, because we will be now looking at one very important. So let me just cover this one point and then we'll take a break so that we can look at the last important point that leads into the philosophy of the constitution, and then we can quickly go through the rest of the points so that in the next class we can start with a new topic altogether.
Yeah, sure, sir.
All right.
So I'll try to come offline, but
No,
when's
no.
the next lecture?
My next lecture today is a Friday, right?
Like Friday.
Yeah. So my next lecture will be on Wednesday.
Okay, sir. I'll try to be here.
Yeah, if you can make it to the class, wonderful. If not, I understand, and this time I'll make sure that whatever I speak in class is audible to you, and that I also pay enough attention to what you are doing. All right.
So the actual problem is in my college is there in this one leave. Okay.
Okay.
So by next month we are planning to reopen.
Mm-hmm.
From that time onwards, I don't think so that I will be the one who can attend this lecture.
Okay. What? See, which college are you studying in?
So GG College.
GG College. Okay. This is around where you stay.
Your website itself.
All right.
Basai West.
Okay. And your college will be reopening in the new academic year. That's what you're telling me.
Yes, sir, third year.
Okay. So at that time, it would it be possible for you to continue with the online classes?
Yeah, online lectures I would be possible, but offline I won't be.
Not an issue. Don't worry. We'll make sure that your classes are being conducted along with the offline students, and I will make sure that I pay enough attention to what you're doing. All right.
Yes, sir.
So don't worry about that. So let's just do one thing. Uh, I'll finish this one point. We'll take a quick short water break, and we'll come back.
Yeah, sure, sir.
Right. So, since we talk about the idea that the problem is that they cannot coexist, these two nations cannot coexist, and hence separation from each other is essential. Uh, this only fuels, okay, the idea of these two communities being very different from each other, okay, and these ideas are based in what? These ideas are based in religion. These ideas are based in cultural practices, okay. One second. Let me. I think I'll have to. I'm deleting these points for just a minute. I'll write them back again. Okay.
Yes, yes, sure.
Okay. It was on the basis of cultural practices. What else? The most important driver of everything, language. Okay. Because they speak a different language. They speak in a different way. We speak in a different language and in a different style. So there is nothing that is similar. But the fun part is the Hindi that we use. Okay, the Hindi that we use today is the one which is a mixture of Hindi and Urdu. Okay, so this language is what people call or have called as the Hindustani language. Okay, and the Hindustani
Yes, sir.
language is also known as the Khadi Boli, which is a mixture of how many languages? Which is a mixture of Sanskrit, which is a mixture of, which also has words from Arabic and Persian. Okay, you have proper Hindi and Urdu. Okay, it is an amalgamation of so many things. So when you talk about language and culture and all the things that are factors in why a certain thing is different, uh, we don't tend to focus on what are the commonalities. When you are driven by the idea that yes, somebody is different, uh, somebody doesn't belong to how you are and what you are so bent on these ideas that you forget to focus on the things which actually matter. And the thing that actually matters in such scenarios is that you people belong in one place, and you people have suffered together in one place. You people have a common experience of oppression. You have a common experience of everything that has been historically important. But that doesn't strike us, okay? And that is where the problems of cultural assimilation and cultural distortion becomes so severe that cultural assimilation is forgotten and there is a misplaced understanding of cultural distortion. That is why we always had this impact on us. And then eventually, this whole problem led to what? This problem led to the partition of India on the brink of the independence. Okay?
Yes, sir.
And the partition of India created created a deep wound. Okay, and we need to know that this deep wound is not only for the Indians; it's for both sides. Nobody thinks of partition in a happy and victorious, glorious way. Partition was saddening. Partition was inhuman. There is nothing good that can be taken from the whole episode of partition. Okay, it is a deep wound for both sides, and it has created a permanent scar. Okay, for all of us. But this needs to be understood that this scar need not be thought of as a scar, because it's not that everybody who belong to Islam or everybody who follows Islam left to Pakistan, right? There are people who stayed back willingly. They weren't forced to stay back in India. There were people and they were freedom fighters. For example, Maulana Azad Saab, okay, who stayed back in India, and not only stayed back in India but worked for Indians and the betterment of the students here. Okay, he came up with institutions and he came up with a lot of other things. He worked consistently on education. He was one of the very few people who ardently believed that his religion is secondary, his national identity and his loyalty towards the nation and the struggle that they've been through is higher as compared to the religion. And that is something that we people often forget to look. We look at those people who left and we look at the violence, but the violence was never one sided, it was always two sided. The problems were never one sided, it were always two sided. And we essentially have this huge communal problem now that we have. Okay, all of this has now translated into bitter communal politics. All right,
Yes.
I hope you have the clear head. Do you have any doubts? Do you have any questions? Is there
No, sir.
something you would like to share or speak?
No, sir, not yet.
All right. We'll take a quick break for a couple of minutes. I'll just grab a drink of water and we shall resume. All right.
Yes, sure.
Let me just switch off the camera for a minute. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Um, take a screen grab of what we've done so far so that I can go on to the third point.
Done, sir.
Now, so far we've understood two major important problems. One is the problem of regionalism, one is the problem of communalism, right? And in all of this, excuse me, I'm sorry, this is urgent. I need to take this call. I beg your pardon, sorry. Jain sir, बोला ना सर. वंडरफुल. मी आज किती वाजेपर्यंत येऊ? चालेल चालेल, मी 1:30 पर्यंत पोहोचेन. ओके. ठीक आहे ना, मी आजच येईन. मी कलेक्ट करून ठेवतो चेक. अच्छा. बरं बरं. चालेल चालेल. हो हो हो. चालेल. ठीक आहे सर. ओके, थँक्यू. Alright, sorry for that. I had to take one urgent call. Um, Coming back to what we were doing so far, we've understood the problems of regionalism, we've understood the problem of communalism. Now, why we've done
Yes.
it, we'll get to that in just a minute. But before we move on forward, there is one last problem that we need to look at, and that is the problem of colonialism or imperialism. Okay. Now, we've been under imperial and colonial rule for a really, really long time. So when I was mentioning dates of all the history, okay, let's look at it from this perspective, that the people who were living on this continent, okay, or the people who were living on this subcontinent were not exposed to any other ruler from outside until the Persian conquest happened. After the Persian conquest happened, you had rulers from different parts of the world coming to this country. Okay, so far you had kingdoms जो यहीं पे थे, right? You had kingdoms जो यहीं से belong करते थे. Am I making sense? समझ में आ रहा है?
Yes, sir.
हाँ.
समझ में.
So अब तक कैसा था कि यहाँ पे जितने भी रूल करने वाले हैं वो यहीं से हैं. Every one of them belongs to this subcontinent. They've born here, they've been raised here, okay. But then you had the Persian conquest happen in the earlier parts of the 12th and then the 13th century. Okay, when you had the Persian conquest, from there a specific trend of sorts started. Okay, so first the Persian conquest, then you had, when did Vasco da Gama come to India?
Sorry, sir.
When did Vasco da Gama come to India?
Not exactly.
Somewhere in
The date I don't
somewhere in
remember
the 15th
exactly.
century, right? Vasco da Gama was a Portuguese sailor, correct?
Yes, yes.
Now, Vasco da Gama, when he came to India, he not only was a Portuguese sailor, but he was also someone who wanted to establish a stronghold over here. So, when he came here, he waged a war against the local king in Calicut.
So, can I ask you when was the day, year?
The exact year, if I am not wrong, is 1417 or 29. I'm not sure. I'm a little hazy. Just give me a second. Let me see. Let me just Google it right away.
Yes, sir.
1498. So just at the end of the 15th century.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Vasco da Gama came to India in 1498. So we need to understand what here, that Vasco da Gama came to India in, one second. Let me just write this down here. Okay, he came to India in 1498. Okay. So
Okay, sir.
consistently, we've had people coming from outside trying to establish control. He waged a war against the king in Calicut, okay, in an attempt of establishing some sort of terror. He killed a bunch of locals, okay, people who lived around the harbor and the port. They were killed thanks to Vasco da Gama. Then you had the East India Company, okay, which came to India,
Yes, sir.
and later on it established its first stronghold in 1757. Okay, after that
Yeah.
it kept spreading all over India. Oh God, I hate this keyboard at times. Kept spreading across the Indian subcontinent. Okay, later on, when the issue,
So this East India Company has found this Diwani right, like they have claimed this Diwani rights.
yes, 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 that's correct.
Okay.
So, and it is on the basis of those rights that they waged war against the Nawab of Bengal.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. So that is when the 1757 Battle of Plassey happened. Then you had the Battle of Buxar, and all small battles kept happening, eventually leading to them establishing a good, strong control over India. Okay, they started running the country in their own way. Finally, the major problem happened in 1857. Okay, and in 1857 you had the national uprising, and the national uprising again was not simply on the basis of national sentiment. We need to understand and we need to be practical about this, that the national uprising happened on a national scale, but it did not start because of national sentiment. It started out of cultural and religious sentiments. Okay,
Okay, sir.
in an in an attempt to uh, deliberately taunt or deliberately tease uh, the people over here. Okay, in order to deliberately taunt the Muslims and the Hindus who were part of the East India Company's army, okay, who were part of the British army. What they did was, there were cartridges that need to be used for guns and rifles, right? They sealed that cartridges, so the Hindu cartridges, the cartridges that were given to the Hindu soldiers, were covered in cow fat, and the cartridges given to the Muslim soldiers were covered in pig fat. Okay, both of which are animals that are not consumed by that specific religion. Hindus do not consume cow because it is considered to be holy. uh, Muslims do not consume pig because it is considered to be unholy. Okay, in either way it hurts the religious sentiments of those people, and that is when they started feeling really bad about everything. And that is when they finally decided that something needs to be done about it. That okay, fine, you established your rule, you are taking our resources, you're considering us as slaves, everything is fine, but then you are making it way too much personal for us to be able to handle it, and hence something needs to be done about it.
Yes, sir. Getting.
That is when they decided that, you know what, enough is enough. We are now going to do something about this, and we are going to try and get rid of you. All right.
Yes, sir.
So the national uprising happens, but they face defeat. Now, the reason for facing this defeat again lies in some form of regional sentiment, because in the national uprising, the participation of the southern states came very late. Okay, if the southern states had participated sooner, okay, that would have been way too much easy. Okay, but that did not happen. The southern states participated only very late, and this is why the problem of uprising is such that if the southern states came along sooner, there was a good fighting chance for the forces against the British. And why do you think the southern regions did not come together sooner? Because they've always had a certain degree of animosity towards the north. Okay, they've always had a certain feeling of non-belonging to the north. They've always felt that the south is far too different from the north, and hence they don't want to involve themselves with any business of the north. Understood?
Yes, sir,
So,
understood.
so that is the reason even today you have the problems where the southern states are belligerent in the sense that they don't speak Hindi. Okay. Have you seen the movie Two
Yes, sir.
States?
Sorry, sir.
Have you seen the movie Two States? Do you watch television?
So I used to watch the television, but I haven't watched the movie.
Okay. So there is this one movie Two States which is adapted from Chetan Bhagat's novel, and the hero, the protagonist of the novel, is a North Indian who falls in love with a South Indian girl, and he's off in South India visiting her at her parents' home, and they're talking about something, and they're all sitting there and they're talking in Tamil, and he eventually, just jokingly says, कि क्या आप प्लीज हिंदी में बात कर सकते हैं, मुझे कुछ समझ में नहीं आ रहा. Okay. To which the father of the girl replies कि तुम तमिल सीख लो.
Okay.
Okay, and this is not simply for the sake of a joke, or this is not simply that has been introduced inside the movie as comic relief. No, this is the fact of the matter that even today, people over there do not speak in Hindi, not because they cannot learn Hindi, but because they don't feel the need to. When everyone over there protects and follows the cultural sentiment so strongly, you don't have to follow all of the other parts, right? You can simply
Yes, sir.
get along by speaking in the language that you speak. So that's how it is. So they face defeat, and what happens after that? In 1860, the Queen's rule starts in India. Okay, it is the start of the Queen's rule or the British Raj. Okay, now we are, instead of wasting time, let's quickly go through certain points. Start of the British Raj. Okay, a long, long, long journey of independence. Now, what's happening on a parallel scale across in the world? Okay, in 1914, okay, you have
Yes, sir.
World War One. In 1917, okay, what happened in the year 1917? What was so crucial? The Bolshevik Revolution. Okay,
Yes, sir.
in Russia. Then in 1918 the World War ends, everything happens fine. Okay, in 1935-36, okay, you have the rise of Hitler. In 1938, World War II begins. In 1945, America drops an atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. At the same time, the World War ends in 1945. Okay, United Nations is established, and the process of decolonization begins. In 1946, this is where the whole issue becomes very severe. Cold War starts.
Yes, sir.
And in 1947, what happens in 1947? India finally gains independence. But we are independent now in a world that is bipolar in nature. Okay, divided into two power blocks. Which power blocks? One is the capitalist power block, that is on the side of USA, right? and the communist power bloc, which has the USSR, okay, or Russia in lay terms. Understand that rest of the countries in the world had taken their sides of which bloc do they belong to, whether it is the capitalist bloc or the communist bloc. They followed a specific ideology, they had a specific agenda, okay, and it was in 1947 itself that the world was on the brink of a nuclear war. So, why have I written down all of this? Is because you need to understand the amount of instability that was existent on the international level when India was fighting for its freedom. Okay? And everything that was happening on the international front was also affecting what was happening in India. समझ में आ रहा है?
Yes, sir. समझ में.
जैसे कि हमारे लोकेलिटी में कुछ होता है तो हम पे असर पड़ता है ना उस चीज़ का.
होता है सर.
Exactly. In the same way, जब ग्लोबल पेडिस्टल पे कुछ हो रहा है तो उसका असर तो होगा ही होगा हम पे. और उस वजह से when India became independent, India was independent now in a world which was divided into two blocks, and we had to make a choice कि which block to follow. Okay? इसका मतलब ये
Yes, sir.
कि we fought for sovereignty, okay? But we now have to think of trading it for suzerainty. Now what is suzerainty? Suzerainty means basically किसी दूसरे का अमल एक्सेप्ट करना. बट कैसे? कॉलोनियलिज्म में कैसा होता है कि तुम्हारे सारे ही राइट्स सस्पेंड हो जाते हैं ना, तुम पे पूरी तरह टेक ओवर कर लेता है कोई. यहाँ पे वैसा नहीं है. यहाँ पे एटलीस्ट फॉर द नेम सेक तुम्हारे पास पार्शियल कंट्रोल रहेगा तुम्हारे देश का. ओके, तुम बेसिक छोटी छोटी चीज़ों के टाइम पे कर सकते हो, लेकिन कल को अगर वॉर होता है फुल स्केल तो तुमको भी तुम्हारे पावर ब्लॉक के साथ, जो भी तुम्हारा पावर ब्लॉक का पेरेंट कंट्री है, उसके साथ जाके तुम्हें वॉर फाइट करना पड़ेगा. तुम्हारे पास कोई ऑप्शन नहीं बचता. ओके, यू हैव टू फाइट दैट वॉर. देयर इज नो अदर ऑप्शन लेफ्ट इन योर हैंड्स. ठीक है?
Yes.
This is how it works. So we had to choose between sovereignty or suzerainty, and we decided to go with sovereignty, and that is why we established NAM, that is the non-aligned movement. Okay, non-aligned movement में क्या था? Basically it was a group of countries that said we will not take any side, let us be free. Okay, one
Yes, sir.
of the people who started the non-aligned movement was our first prime minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. Okay, and Pandit Nehru was of the opinion that India needs to sustain on its own, and we have just received independence. We simply cannot give it away because two large forces in the world believe that you need to take sides. No, it is not necessary. Okay, it is extremely important for us to
Yes.
protect and preserve what we have achieved after shedding so much blood, after such difficulty, you know. Now, अब
Yeah,
तक हमने
sir.
ये जो 3 मेजर पॉइंट कवर किए, that tells you a lot about a lot of things. Now the current point जो अभी हमने फिनिश किया, it tells you about why we have put so much emphasis on the idea of sovereignty in the constitution. Correct?
Yes, sir.
The first thing that we did before still tells us about how the idea of democracy comes in India, because imperial rule में क्या होता है? There is no democracy, right? In all these
Yes.
years we had no choice, we had no opinion of the people. और लोगों का ओपिनियन बहुत ज़रूरी है. नाउ व्हेन वी से डेमोक्रेटिक, ये तो एक हो गया कि पीपल मेक द चॉइस. ओके, बट व्हेन वी से डेमोक्रेटिक रिपब्लिक, हम डेमोक्रेटिक रिपब्लिक क्यों कहते हैं? बिकॉज रिपब्लिक इसलिए कहते हैं बिकॉज वो गणतंत्र, उसका हिंदी ट्रांसलेशन गणतंत्र है, राइट? और गणतंत्र
Yes,
इसीलिए
sir.
कहते हैं बिकॉज हम जैसे आम आदमियों में से ही उठ के कोई लोकल कोई रिप्रेजेंटेटिव बनता है पॉलिटिकल, और फिर वो आगे जाके गवर्नेंस का हिस्सा होता है ना.
हाँ सर.
So that is the reason we call it a republic, that it is the common people who actually make up for the country. Okay. Why do we have the emphasis on secular? We have an emphasis on secular because we've had the problems of regionalism and communalism for such a long time that we've been divided consistently. Okay. And it is the problems
Okay.
of these ideas that leads to a lot of inequality and leads to a lot of injustice. And hence we are able to focus on, not, well, not able to, but hence we are sort of forced to look at the ideas of equality and justice and fraternity. Fraternity matlab kya? Bhaichara. Okay. The idea of fraternity comes from the French Revolution. The French Revolution slogan of equality, liberty and fraternity is what we have adopted as part of the philosophy of the Constitution. Okay. When we talk about
Okay, sir.
when we talk about freedom, when we talk about rights, we have taken the reference of the American Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. Okay.
Sir.
यहाँ तक clear है पूरा?
पूरा clear है sir.
Great. And more importantly, we've always had one major issue with respect to communalism and regionalism and everything. Two of them being, one is the issue of caste and caste-based atrocities and crimes and discrimination. Okay. The second issue is uniform civil code. Okay. The reason we do not have uniform civil code is because there is no uniformity inside the Indian nation, is it? We are not all same sorts of people. For example, the moment you cross the Maharashtrian border towards the south, the language changes, the attire changes, everything changes, right? Similarly, when you
Yes,
go
sir.
up
Right.
north, okay, or if you go up to the neighboring state, you go to MP or you go to Gujarat or you go to Chhattisgarh, you go to Odisha, you go anywhere, immediately you will find that there is this change in how people are, in how things are. लैंग्वेज बदल जाती है, खान पान बदल जाता है, रहने सहने का तरीका बदल जाता है. सो इतना डिफरेंस है हम सब में. तो यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड लाओगे कैसे तुम? हर जगह का कल्चरल इंटरप्रिटेशन, हर जगह का जस्टिस का राइट और रॉन्ग का इंटरप्रिटेशन अलग है. तुम यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड लाने के लिए तुम्हारा पॉपुलेशन होमोजीनस होना चाहिए, जो कि हमारा नहीं है. हमारा देश सिर्फ एक ही भाषा बोलता है क्या? नहीं. हमारे देश में सिर्फ एक ही धर्म है क्या? नहीं. हमारे देश में सिर्फ एक ही कल्चर रहा है क्या? नहीं. तो हम कैसे यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड ला सकते हैं? एंड दैट इज़ द रीज़न वी हैव नॉट यूज्ड यूनिफॉर्म सिविल कोड एज अ टूल इन द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. The reason we have reservation is not simply because now there are a lot of debates about reservation, and I want to clarify it right now. Okay, we have some time. So when we talk about reservation, the problem surrounding reservation is that uh, it is uh, it is one of those things where reservation was brought for the upliftment of the people. See, बहुत लोगों का अंडरस्टैंडिंग क्या है कि रिजर्वेशन की वजह से एकेडमिक सेक्टर में मोस्टली सीट्स नहीं मिलते या फिर एडमिशन्स का इशू हो जाता है, राइट?
Yes, sir.
लेकिन वी नीड टू अंडरस्टैंड दैट ये जो इश्यूज है ना, ये इश्यूज क्यों एग्जिस्ट करते हैं. इसको एक्सप्लेन करने के लिए ना मेरे पास सबसे सिंपल तरीका है. हैव यू एवर हैड एन इंजरी डोना?
Sorry sir.
कभी इंजर हुई हो, कभी लगा है तुमको, कभी फ्रैक्चर वैक्चर हुआ
हाँ
है?
सर, बहुत बार लगे.
सो जब हमको लगता है या फिर हमारा फ्रैक्चर होता है या हमारा घुटना फूट जाता है, व्हेन वी फॉल, लगने में कितना टाइम लगता है? इंजरी होने में कितना टाइम जाता है?
लगा, वो लगने के बाद ही पता चलता है लगा है.
नहीं
इतना
नहीं,
टाइम नहीं लगता.
लेकिन हमको जब हिट होता है, जब हम इंजर होते हैं, है ना, तो
ओके.
वो इंजरी होने में टाइम नहीं लगता ना. 2-3 सेकंड
नहीं
सेकंड
लगता.
में इंजर हो जाते हैं हम. फ्रैक्चर होता
यस.
है, हम गिरते हैं, हो जाते हैं इंजर तुरंत. लेकिन
हाँ
वो
सर,
फ्रैक्चर रिपेयर होने में कितना टाइम जाता है?
काफी टाइम लगता है.
राइट. तुम अगर हड्डी तोड़वा लो अपनी, तो तुम्हारे 2 महीने तो जाते हैं प्लास्टर में.
हाँ.
ओके. लेकिन वो हड्डी टूटने में 2 सेकंड नहीं लगते.
हाँ बराबर.
द पॉइंट आई एम ट्राइंग टू मेक इज कि ये एक सोसाइटी का सेक्शन रहा है. ओके. व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट द शेड्यूल कास्ट, द शेड्यूल ट्राइब्स, द नोमैडिक ट्राइब्स, ओके, द बैकवर्ड क्लासेस, these people as part of the Indian society, and more importantly it has to do with religion because other religions do not have caste. Okay. When we talk about the Hindu religion, uh, it is something that these people have been oppressed for thousands of years. Okay.
ओके.
So when you've been oppressed for thousands of years, वो जो injustice हुआ है तुम्हारे साथ, वो रिपेयर होने में कितना टाइम जाएगा?
टाइम लगेगा काफी ज्यादा ही.
भले ही तुम्हारा चलो तो वी लिव इन अ मॉडर्न वर्ल्ड, एजुकेशन इज देयर, ये है वो है, लेकिन वो रिपेयर होने में भले ही डबल टाइम ना लगे, लेकिन थोड़ा टाइम तो जाएगा। अगर 2000 साल इंजस्टिस हुआ है तो कम से कम 1000 साल तो जाएंगे टिल एवरीथिंग कम्स टू नॉर्मल सी।
Yes, sir.
एंड आज हम लोग रो रहे हैं विद द आइडिया कि अरे रिजर्वेशन क्यों है और मेरिट क्यों नहीं है और ऐसा है और वैसा है। The problem with reservation is that the implementation of reservation is wrong. Reservation is meant to create a level playing field. Okay, can you see me? Am I visible to you?
Yes, sir. Okay.
मतलब मेरी शक्ल दिख रही है ना?
हाँ सर, दिख
हाँ.
रहा है.
So reservation is supposed to create a level playing field like this, जहाँ पे ना सारे के सारे लोग एक ही लाइन पे खड़े. जब सारे के सारे लोग एक ही लाइन पे खड़े होंगे और रेस शुरू करेंगे, तब वो तब वो जब जीतेंगे या हारेंगे वो उनकी कैपेबिलिटी पर है, राइट?
Yes, sir.
देर वॉज दिस, मैंने लास्ट टाइम भी क्लास में ये एग्जाम्पल दिया था, मैं अभी भी दूंगा क्योंकि वो परफेक्ट एग्जाम्पल है ऑफ एक्सप्लेनिंग हाउ इट वर्क्स. दिस इज सम सोशल एक्सपेरिमेंट दैट वाज कंडक्टेड इन द यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स. एंड वहाँ पे कैसा था, उस बंदे ने ऐसे किया कि एक रेस के लिए एक स्टार्ट लाइन और एक फिनिश लाइन तैयार किया, और स्टार्ट लाइन पे जितने लोग खड़े थे उनको बोला कि आई टेल यू फ्यू थिंग्स, इफ दे अप्लाई टू यू, 2 कदम आगे आ जाओ. ओके okay? तो उसने पूछा कि दोज हु हैव हैड अ प्रॉपर एजुकेशन ऑल अलोंग, एक स्टेप फॉरवर्ड आ जाओ, तो 4 लोग आ गए. दोज हु हैड नो प्रॉब्लम्स इन हैविंग 2 मील्स अ डे, वो लोग आगे आ जाओ, 3 लोग आगे आ गए. दोज हु हैव हैड बोथ ऑफ देयर पेरेंट्स एंड देयर पेरेंट्स आर स्टिल अलाइव, आगे आ जाओ, तो बचे हुए और 2 लोग आगे आ गए. दोज हु हैव नो डिसेबिलिटी, आगे आ जाओ, तो 2-3 लोग आगे आ गए, थोड़े पीछे रह गए. करते करते हुआ क्या, यहाँ पे स्टार्ट लाइन की तरफ एक बंदा खड़ा है, आगे 2 लोग खड़े हैं, फिर आगे 3 लोग खड़े हैं, और बाद में आगे एक और खड़ा है, यहाँ तक इतने पॉइंट तक, और यहाँ तुम्हारा फिनिश लाइन है. ओके.
Yes, sir.
और फिर उसने बोला कि ठीक है अब रेस शुरू करो, तो कौन जीतेगा? ये वाला ही जीतेगा ना जो इतना आगे आगे खड़ा है ऑलरेडी.
जो सामने खड़ा है.
करेक्ट. विच मीन्स दैट वी हैव अ लॉट ऑफ प्रिविलेज दैट वी डोंट अंडरस्टैंड, which means that we have been given so many facilities just like that. Okay. And it's not that कि मतलब given facilities का मतलब ऐसा है कि सिर्फ हमारे माँ बाप की वजह से मिला या फिर कुछ भी. हम कौन से घर में पैदा होते हैं, हम कौन सी कास्ट में, कौन से रिलीजन में पैदा होते हैं, हमको किस तरह का एजुकेशन मिलता है, वेदर वी आर बॉर्न इन एन अर्बन सेटअप और वेदर वी आर बॉर्न इन अ रूरल सेटअप, whether we have any disability or not, all of this comes together, and all of that leads into the cumulative impact of what is justice and what is injustice. Okay. जो अब ये
Yes,
जो
sir.
बंदा था जो लाइन के सबसे पहले खड़ा था, जिसको कुछ एडवांटेज नहीं रहा है कभी भी जीवन में, वो केपेबल होने के बावजूद भी हार जाएगा
हार सकते हैं.
बिकॉज ही वॉज नॉट गिवन द राइट अपॉर्चुनिटी.
Yes, sir.
जो इंसान यहाँ खड़ा है और जो इंसान यहाँ खड़ा है और यहाँ अगर फिनिशिंग लाइन है, तो ये वाला जीत ही जाएगा, ये कितना भी तेज भागे.
Yes, sir.
So the process of reservation is such where you've been given reservation to create a level playing field, जहाँ पे हम सारे एक समान दर्जे पे आ जाए. तो जिनको injustice रहा है, जिनको representation नहीं मिला, जिनको मान सम्मान नहीं मिला, जिनको basic necessities fulfill करने का chance नहीं मिला, जिनको political representation कम रहा है, जिनको education कम रहा है, जिनके पास social justice and stature नहीं रहा है, okay, उन सबको एक समान लेवल पे लाने के लिए reservation है कि when everybody will be educated, everyone has opportunities for job, everyone is adequately represented in politics, and everyone is adequately getting jobs or has avenues of jobs everywhere, that is when everyone is standing at the same line, irrespective of their caste, their color, their gender, their ability, disability, everything. और फिर जब रेस शुरू होगा तब वो तुम्हारे इंडिविजुअल मेरिट पे है, बिकॉज तुम किसी को ब्लेम नहीं कर सकते कि इस वजह से कर नहीं पाया.
बराबर.
Correct. This
Yes,
is how
sir.
reservation works. That is the reason we have the provision of reservation in the constitution, which is a part of the justice aspect. जो है ना हमारे preamble में जो लिखा है हमने justice, उसका हिस्सा है reservation, because reservation is important for social justice. Along with that, we've come up with fundamental rights. Okay, कौन से fundamental rights है? Right to equality, right to freedom, right against exploitation, cultural and education rights, freedom of religion, and constitutional remedies. Okay, 6 fundamental rights, chapter 3 of the constitution. ये सारे के सारे इंपॉर्टेंट हैं. क्यों? बिकॉज इन अ डेमोक्रेसी, इफ यू वांट द गवर्नमेंट टू बी इन चेक, इफ यू वांट टू अवॉइड द chaos दैट वी टॉक अबाउट इन सोसाइटी, यू नीड राइट्स. ओके. एंड राइट्स विच
Yes.
आर इनएलिएनेबल, जैसे जॉन लॉक ने लिखा था कि दीज राइट्स विच आर गिवन टू ह्यूमन बीइंग्स और द राइट्स दैट दे कीप विद देमसेल्व्स, the right to life, liberty and property, are inalienable rights. Of course, हमने right to property हटा दिया. It was a fundamental right, but हमने वो क्यों हटा दिया? Because there are two situations. One is where the government has to use the land at times, okay, and if you disallow the government from using it, then it can become a big problem, because you will say, you know what, it is my personal property and it is my private property. You cannot simply just come here and ask for it. तो उस वजह से प्रॉब्लम हो जाता है. सेकेंड इज दैट इंडिया हैज़ हैड अ हिस्ट्री ऑफ ज़मींदारी, राइट. हमारे यहाँ पे साहूकार और ज़मींदारी वाला हिस्ट्री रहा है, और उस वजह से दे यूज टू ओन ह्यूज पीसेस ऑफ लैंड, बिकॉज ऑफ विच इट क्रिएटेड अ बिग प्रॉब्लम. और व्हेन वी हैड द लैंड रिफॉर्म्स कम इन, ओके, पंडित नेहरू मेड श्योर दैट लैंड रिफॉर्म्स के टाइम पे लैंड रीडिस्ट्रीब्यूशन हो. ओके, लैंड रीडिस्ट्रीब्यूट करना मतलब क्या, जो एक्सेस अननेसेसरी लैंड है लैंड ओनर्स के पास, वो लेके जिनको ज़रूरत है उनको देना. ओके, एंड इस प्रोसेस के लिए अगर राइट टू प्रॉपर्टी नहीं हटा दिया गया होता, देन इट वुड हैव बीन अ मेजर इशू. ओके,
गेटिंग.
सो इस वजह से वी हैव फंडामेंटल राइट्स, इस वजह से वी हैव ऑल ऑफ दीज आइडियाज, व्हिच इज द फिलॉसफी ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. एंड देयर इज नो आर्टिकल, देयर इज नो चैप्टर, देयर इज नो प्रोविजन दैट स्पेसिफिकली स्पीक्स अबाउट द बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, but we have a certain basic structure of the constitution that is essential for the survival of our constitutional power and our constitutional rights. And the preamble to the constitution, our fundamental rights, and a lot of other provisions in the constitution are understood to be the basic structure of the constitution, which cannot be amended just that easily, because उसको amend करने से तुम constitutional values को dilute कर दोगे. Okay, that is the reason we do not have the provision of being able to amend the basic structure of the constitution. There are alterations in fundamental rights, there are amendments in fundamental rights, but अगर वो बहुत ज़्यादा सीवियर हो या फिर बहुत मेजर अमेंडमेंट्स हो जो बहुत ज़्यादा ऑल्टर कर दे रहे हैं, तो वो अलाउ नहीं होगा. Alright?
Yes, sir.
Great. So I think we should pack up for today. Alright? I hope all of your doubts are cleared so far. In the next lecture, we begin with a new topic. Okay?
Yes,
along
sir,
with
sure.
everybody else. And I hope to see you on Wednesday.
Yes, sir.
Alright.
Sure.
See you.
Thank you, sir, for this lecture.
No problem.
Today's lecture, I was able to understand the concept.
Great. And I hope you also had fun listening to all of the historical facts that have existed throughout.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just make sure that ये जो tab है ना, उसका screen grab ले लो एक बार, and then we can wrap up. Okay.
हाँ, sir, ले लिया. Sir, your name, please.
Sorry?
Your name, please.
My name is Mukund, spelled as Mukund.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. See you.
Yes.